Okay, we're going to begin work on our transmission today. We going to remove the outer cover screws. There's also 3 nuts on these that have to come off. We've got all those loose, and now we're just going to tap this cover off a little bit with a hammer. You can use a rubber mallet on these too. I'm just tapping real lightly on this. I'm not hitting this real hard. So if you have to maybe use a little bit of persuasion with a screwdriver, that's okay, but you want to stay away from that kind of stuff as much as possible. The cover should come off. Usually the kicker will come off with that because it hooks into the cover there. The spring, there's a pin on that cover that holds that spring, but this one kind of came out without it. So, and there's all your shift selectors. You can see the spring on this kicker is all deformed, so that's going to have to be replaced, but that's a pretty minor thing. The rest of it looks pretty good in there. Here we have this screw that you need to make sure you get this out of here before you try to take the cover off. It's pretty well stuck, so one of the things you can use if you don't have like a hand impact is a lot of times 3 or 4 good wraps with a screwdriver on a screwdriver handle with a hammer will jar these threads loose and you can get these out. On a lot of the 650s back by the kicker bushing there, you can see there's also another screw as well, but these early per unit bikes didn't have that. Here these 2 screws are also kind of tight, so we'll give them the same treatment we did the other there with the hammer and just knock them loose. Try not to booger them up because you'll really have a hard time getting them out. Here we have the Kickstarter ratchet nut. We'll just persuade that off there with a little bit of air impact. Usually a wrench and a good whack with a hammer will get that loose. A little bit of tapping here with a hammer, and then maybe a pry or 2 with a screwdriver, and that collar will come off. And this is your ratchet, and then the other piece is your pinion. And you want to make sure that these teeth on here are good and not all chewed up. And these are all constructed, the twins, 650, 750 twins, and the singles, 250, 441, and 500 BSAs, have a bushing in that pinion there, and then there's a spring and then another washer behind that spring on top of that bearing right there. So they're all pretty much the same design. It kind of shows the familial design, I guess. When all this stuff was made, it was designed by the same guy, but at any rate, then your inner cover will come off, and I try to leave the main shaft in place. If you need to just move the cover a little bit and then tap the main shaft back, leave that main shaft in there, and that'll help you identify things as you take it apart. And you can see the grunge inside of here, pretty slimy, but all that'll get cleaned up. Here in the bottom you got your lay shaft, and that's your first gear on top. And we'll pull the shifter fork shaft out, and should just ease out of there. You can see the end of this is reduced, and that goes in first and goes into the case, so you want to remember that when you put that back together. The later twins have just a flat on one side, and that's to be able to allow you to put it down into that hole and not have it vapor lock or hydraulically lock, so you can't get it down in there and seat. Take the main shaft nut off. Here's the sprocket. You can see it's pretty well chewed. This transmission was not sitting straight in the bike, and so it was getting some pretty odd wear. The main shaft, you just want to check for wear there where 4th gear runs. Make sure the taper is nice and clean, and the slot for the key isn't chipped up. And we'll take that next gear in the stack out, and then we'll pull this main shaft out of here. Now these early pre-unit ones are kind of a different kind of main shaft. Or lay shaft. They have an inner and an outer sleeve gear with a bunch of bushings inside and a couple spacers. So they're a little bit different than the late unit bikes, but it's still works just as good, I guess. So there you can see all that good stuff coming out of there, and there's your last gear on top of main shaft 4th, high gear. And we'll here shortly we'll pull the cam plate out. You want to just check that for wear. You can have a little bit of wear in these, but you know, the less you have, the better your shifting is. But when you have an old bike like this, sometimes you just can't find parts for them. So here's your shifter detent, and then there's also a detent bolt, I guess you would call it, sleeve bolt kind of down in the bottom that you can take out too. And there's your fourth gear coming out. So, and this is kind of the accumulated crud in the bottom of this thing. There's just about a half an inch of just sludge, pretty nasty stuff in there, rust particles, just all sorts of stuff. There was some water in this too, but it wasn't as corroded as I thought it might have been, given how much